What you might not know about Teresa is that she's fluent in English and Spanish. She speaks Italian, and she's learning Portuguese. She's also a proud plant mama with dozens of healthy potted plants in her care. On our right, Dr. Steve Schill is the lead scientist for the Caribbean division of the Nature Conservancy. It's been there for about 20 years. Nature Conservancy is a global environmental nonprofit with more than 400 scientists. Lucky for us, he's also an adjunct geography professor here at BYU, meaning he willingly gave up life on a tropical island, and he can tell us why. He uses remote sensing and GIS to study and protect marine habitats, and he has some incredible stories. This is true. Where adventure goes, Steve follows, or maybe it's the other way around. So tonight they'll talk about their work as geospatial scientists and tell us how maps can help us see what others can't. Teresa and Steve, let's give them a round of applause.
All right.
Are you on?
I think I'm on. Good to be with you.
All right, let's get this going. Okay, so Brayman did a great job introducing us. We have been working together for a long time. Steve took me as a recent graduate when I was very inexperienced, but I was willing to do a lot of work. And ever since, we've been doing a lot of mapping projects, mostly in the Caribbean, but also in Africa. And we have had a lot of fun, as you can tell on these pictures. But mostly we've been doing a lot of mapping, lots of computer time, lots of teaching time. But every once in a while, we also help with fighting crime.
Yeah, we often call it Schill's thrills.
Yes, yeah, we call it Schill's thrills. Yes.
When we were able to get out in the field and you know, the nice thing about remote sensing, which you're going to learn about, is remote sensing. You spend half the time in front of staring at a computer, doing your models and playing with your data, and the other half you get to go out in the field and collect data. You bring that, and then when you're out in the field, you can have fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. Good to get out and see nature, appreciate, learn about the culture and the things that we're trying to protect.
And the reason why we wanted to feature this picture, it's a remote sense picture, right? It's a satellite photo. So on my first project with Steve, I was mapping mangroves, reefs, so also like any building I could find in Grenada. And then when we were mapping that, we found these little rooftops up here in the banana plantations that were really interesting, right? And I didn't think much out of them, but when we took that to the government, there was a big story behind that.
Yeah, so I hired Teresa to identify, as she said, all these little things. And then when we got to the north side of the volcano, no one lives there. And so we weren't expecting to be mapping buildings. Yeah, we saw these patterns going on. And it required, of course, field work. Go out there and check out what it was.
I did not go there.
But and what it was is a lot of banana farmers had abandoned their banana cultivation because they couldn't compete with a lot of the Central America farmers, and they had resorted to growing ganja on the northern slope, or marijuana. So these are marijuana plots that have been, you know, we in the forestry knew that it was an issue, but we were able to actually quantify over 300. Use that as information because you know, there's a certain impact that this is having, and it needs to be monitored on a steep slope, and vegetation is being. So it's just one example. You never know what you're going to find when
you're mapping.
Doing your mapping work.
This is why we said we can see what others can't, because nobody really was thinking any of this, right? It wasn't until we took some time to like look at things that we found an interesting thing happening that also happened when this picture was taken.
Yeah, so this picture is probably one of the most influential photos that was ever taken in 1968 around Christmas time. Apollo 8, there were 3 astronauts. Bill Anders was the one that took this, but NASA's whole mission, you know, they were focused on getting a man to the moon, and their whole fixation was on the moon and just looking, and they were they did 11 orbits around the moon. It's the first time outside of low Earth orbit. And they were taking pictures, and they had a black and white photo, because obviously color is not really going to do you much on the moon. So they were using black and white photos. They were orbiting, and about the fourth orbit, everything lined up, and they happened to see the Earth rise up of the horizon. And it just blew their minds. And Bill Andrews, "Show me the color film. You know, this is awesome. I'm seeing color." So they handed him the Hasselblad, and he started shooting pictures. He was changing exposures. And this was just kind of a fluke. It wasn't something they were expecting to do. But it has had more impact. This started a total environmental movement. Earth Day started a few years later. I mean, when you look at this, you see we're on what they call the blue marble. There's no boundaries. It's one ecosystem, one single ecosystem. Our life support system, and the importance, the beautiful creation, and the importance that we have, these stewards over this planet, really became relevant from one photo, and it still has.
And I think as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we know that everything testifies that there is a God, right? Like seeing that picture is a big testimony that there's a greater creator and that we are here as part of something bigger than this, right? So that's kind of like the big emphasis that we have as we're doing our mapping work, that we are part of something bigger, and that everything that we're playing with or like doing research with it's part of something bigger. It's part of God's creations that we have been given to take care of.
And I know Dr. Paul Cox said on an earlier forum that conservation is an act of worship. You know, we are brothers and sisters on this planet, and failure to act is you know, we need to be thinking about others in terms of their benefit. All the things that we hear in the news today, hear the word unprecedented. How many times have we heard that? You know, with pandemics, with drought, with wildfires. There's a lot of things going on, and nature helps us be resilient. So focusing on how we can better protect nature, which gives us a variety of benefits for our well-being, really important. And we're going to be talking about the tools that we can use to be more efficient in protecting, gaining nature.
Yeah, so as you heard in our introductions, we're both geographers, right? We're both geospatial analysts. But basically what we do is that we play with geography. And we believe in location being one of the most influential things for the development of nations and people, right? So location matters to us. Geography tries to figure out what's the relationship between the physical environment, the social environment, to the economic environment. We try to put all these things together as we think geography, we think places. A lot of times people are like, "Oh, you are a geographer? Do you know rocks?" I'm like, "Wrong geo. I study maps." Geology. Some people here do geology. But the thing is that we care about location, we care about countries, but we also care about any place. And we have some tools to like speak geography, right? To visualize geography, to kind of like find a way to show what we're doing. And some of the tools are called GIS and remote sensing. So GIS is the technology that we use to take all that spatial data that is everywhere and visualize it, put it together in a nice little map that can help you find patterns. Like when you see something in a map, you can start finding patterns, see relationships. If you think about COVID and how at the beginning there were all these maps showing how COVID was spreading, right? If you see that information just on a bar graph or a spreadsheet, it's kind of like, you know, informative. But when you look at it on a map, you can find that maybe things are moving our way, or maybe you start asking questions like, why are there so many cases in these neighborhoods? Or like, there's power in visualizing things, and GIS is the technology that helps us do that. There's also remote sensing.
Yeah, so we're trying to understand spatial relationships. We're trying to understand, you know, we'll talk about it a little bit later, a vulnerable community that lives on the coast. They're dependent on fish as their source of protein. They're dependent on those coral reefs for the fish. They're also dependent on that coral reef to break the waves, protect them from storm damage, and flooding. And we can use tools to measure things about our planet, like remote sensing, using satellites, using airplanes with sensors on them, using drones. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it's the science of collecting information, systematic collection of data. And depending on what the question is, we use the tool that we're going to use. And then that information is processed, put into GIS systems. So as we talked before, Teresa was using satellite imagery to digitize and extract information about human surface. And we can understand human activities, we can understand the environment, understand the health, the extent, the change of habitats that we're really interested in protecting. That's the power of these tools. We can collect information across a really big area, we can process it, and the whole goal is to make better decisions, smarter decisions. We want to achieve efficiency.
Yeah, so there's a lot of power in understanding what's happening so you can be smart later. And what we want to do today is to share a few stories of what we have done, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we can all do. But I'm just going to start with like my favorite project that I worked with Steve, which was in grad school. Steve was one of my graduate advisors, and we had a chance to work in Cuba. And this picture is kind of cool, right? Like nice Cuban car. And you see this big wave and you're like, oh, that's just like such a cool picture. But the thing here is that Cuba is an island, right? And there's a lot of tropical storms that hit the Caribbean Ocean and affect all the people that live in the coast. And if you think about this, actually 1/3 of the global population lives by the coast. So this is not just a Cuban issue, it's an issue for a lot of people in this world. And as we know, as climate's changing, tropical storms are becoming more frequent and more intense. So there's a lot of people at risk, and we need to figure out what can we do to help these communities out, right? So I'm just going to show you a few pictures. This is us riding a pink car in the middle of Havana, and a nice little neighborhood, right? That was field work for us. But then just a couple of months later, this is in 2017, this is what happened to Havana. They were hit by a hurricane, and Havana, downtown Havana, was flooded for a long time. And it was really bad. And if you consider the socioeconomic situation of Havana, recovering from this is not an easy thing, right? And it's not just people that get affected by this. This is, again, us doing field work, seeing flamingos. But even the flamingos got hit really bad. Like the storms, there's also some deforestation happening. So the waves come and they just hit everybody. And there's a lot of things that need restoration after that. So thankfully, as we were talking about before, nature is our home, but it's also a protector. And in this case, for what I was doing with my research, we were looking at coral reefs and mangroves, because coral reefs and mangroves are some of the best ecosystems that we have in this planet. They provide a lot of protection. Reefs in particular, they only cover 0.01% of the ocean floor, but they're the home of like 30% of all marine biodiversity. So that's kind of crazy. And that sustains fisheries and tourism. But also, one of the most important things that they do is that they provide coastal protection. So if you look at this illustration over here, when you have a nice, healthy reef system over here, you have lots of fish, and there's lots of time for fishing and scuba diving. And then when the waves come, they don't come very far because there's the reefs and there's the mangroves that will like stop them. But when you don't have that, because of mining for fishing or just like pollution, and there's a lot of things that are affecting reefs, the waves are going to come farther down and they're going to affect people. And that's going to cost us lives and money and sorrows. And I want to show you this little video that illustrates exactly what's happening. This is in the Cayman Islands. This is a video taken by Steve with his drone. And let's see. If you look at these waves, they are coming fairly hard, right? Over here. But then they hit this, which is the reef barrier. And you look at, can you see any waves coming this way now? So what happens there is that the reefs are protecting this coast big time. You never see that, you take that for granted, we never know, but it's the reefs that are protecting all these people from being flooded. So that was the main, that's one of the main things that reefs can do. So what we were doing in Cuba is that, whoa, how do I go back to this? Whoops. So when we were in Cuba, perfect. My job was to map all the reefs and mangroves, or to double check the existing maps of reefs and mangroves and seagrass in Cuba, and map a bunch of other things like the type of coast and elevation and bathymetry and winds and waves and all these things. And we created a nice little model, and we were able to predict which areas were being most benefited from reefs and mangroves. And we also were able to figure out which areas were most vulnerable to flooding and where the reefs and mangroves were being like the most efficient, right? And we were able to deliver a couple of maps to the people to show where they could have their next protected area, right? I'm putting this in context to that they're already existing network of protected areas, but we're just basically telling them, if you protect this reef, you're not only just expanding your network, you're also protecting these many people. Because that was another magical layer that we added over there, not just which reefs were protecting the most area, but we could also map an approximate estimate of how many people were living by the coast. So we could be like, these many kilometers of reefs were protecting this many people, which is really effective. When you're talking conservation, people like to have a money value or a people value, something that will be tangible, which is what we could do. But I think my favorite thing to do is sharing knowledge and talk and gaining knowledge from other people. So we did a lot of training and building capacity down in Cuba, because we can do what we want here with our satellite photos and things like that, but it's not until you get down there that you understand the real situation when it comes to the environment, or also just like the capacity, like the technology capacity that they have and things like this. So we had a couple of great trips where we shared or model and train people over there how to model these things, and they will look over our data and correct it. And it was just this really nice interaction of like us teaching them and then teaching us how to do conservation better in our communities and their communities, which is one of my favorite things. So that was really fun, but then life kept going and I graduated, and then I got a job at a really cool place. Oh, and this is us teaching at a really cool place called BYU, which is right here. And as Bremen was saying, I work as the geospatial manager of the geospatial lab here in the library, which means we provide GIS and remote sensing assistance to the entire university. And what I'm going to do in the next minutes, because I'm running out of time, is to share with you some of the, highlight some of the projects that I've been working on with some great students that a lot of them are here. So just last week, we were helping a professor make a map of air pollution in Nepal. They are going out to check air quality and in some remote areas close to the Himalayas, and how that's affecting certain factories and things like that. We're also helping another professor with quinoa and trying to figure out the different species of quinoa, which is a superfood that can help us fight just malnutrition. We're also doing stuff in Southeast Asia, predicting tsunamis and looking at faults. Carol right here is working on that. We're also looking at wild horses. I don't know if you guys know this, but wild horses are actually a problem in the US. We have way too many of them. So we're trying to analyze where they're going, where they're choosing to go, how they're moving, so we can kind of manage the numbers of wild horses in the earth. These maps might not make sense to you, but they're saying a lot if you know what's behind them. We have also students working on the mega fire that we had here in Utah and how that's affecting streams and waters and things like that. We also have, this is a cool map of bear attacks in North America. So you can have, all of these are like reported bear attacks in the US and Canada, and you can sort them by fatality or type of bear or things like that, which is really fun. Matthew over here is working in Alaska, helping with fishing. This is a really cool project because it's called Citizen Science, right? So they're having like the fishermen use GIS. You're seeing here just like the screenshot of an app, But what's happening is that they're out on their boat and they take a snapshot and a GPS point of the fishes that they're fishing, right? And their goal is to analyze how climate change is changing fish patterns and how this is going to affect fisheries. So it's kind of fun. He gets to have fun and go do some very cool field work. So many projects. Some students are working in Ecuador and looking at all the pathogens that are in the water that people are drinking. Other students are looking at erosion in Hawaii or invasive species that like contribute to wildfires. So I could talk about so many things, but we also have our own BYU campus, right? And we've been working really close with the sustainability office to look at all the things that we can predict and model in our own campus. So this is a map that we worked on last year that is showing the potential solar power if we were to choose to do solar panels at BYU. This is kind of showing us like where the sun is hitting us the best, where we could put the solar panels to be most effective. But we also have recycling bins. You can't hardly see this, but recycling is really important for us, and people don't recycle unless they have a recycling bin close. So we map the recycling bins to find our recycling bin deserts, right? Because there are recycling bin deserts there too. This other map is showing us, or like paved surfaces versus the green surfaces on campus. We have maps of like bikes, bike paths, or bus routes, things like that, things that will help us be more sustainable. But what I want to say here is visualizing things. It's really helping us see some of the problems that we have, but also a lot of the solutions. And there's a lot of power here at BYU with students and professors that have this vision. They are trying to get a greater understanding, finding all these relationships and doing some good things. So I feel very hopeful about what the future holds for us if we keep going this direction.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. Is that better with the mic? Working better? As you can see, there are a lot of different applications for GIS. I mean, Teresa could probably go on and on. And we need more GIS users. There's a lot of areas of interest where you can apply GIS, and it's all about location. Okay, location and what the patterns of those things around you. And as we keep on saying, we want to become more effective in what we're doing. We want to be more efficient. And when I'm doing GIS work for the Nature Conservancy, it's interesting the evolution of the Nature Conservancy in our approach over the 20 years that I've been with the organization. How at the beginning, it was more fortress conservation, keep the people out. Let's save the last great places and kind of lock them up. But now I just spent a whole day today learning about conservation equity. How do we reach out to those that know a lot about the lands and make them more and have them more involved in the work that we're doing? Those that are more vulnerable, coastal populations, indigenous groups. How do we break down racial divides, and how do we make our work more impactful for everyone? And GIS is a great tool to be able to bring in census data and analyze. And I'm most effective in my work when I'm able to say, okay, this is an important piece of the world to protect, because not only is it harboring a lot of biodiversity, but it's also providing a lot of benefits to people. It's providing storm protection. It's providing food. It's providing pharmaceuticals. It's a medicine. Coral reefs are a medicine chest. Lots of things that have come from coral reefs. But I want to walk you through a few projects in the time that we have left, and just briefly talk about some of these things. This is a photo that I took out of a helicopter in Gabon, in East or Western Central Africa. And Gabon is a unique place. It's about the size of Colorado. And I worked on a project for 4 years there, developing a blueprint for conservation for the government. Gabon has about 2.2 million people. It's 80% forested. And it is referred to as the last Eden. It's a place where the megafauna, the elephants, the lowland gorillas, chimpanzees, water buffalo, spills out from the lowland tropical forest onto the beach. And so some people call it the land of the surfing hippo, because it is an amazing place it's been protected over the years because it's been rich in oil. And that's protected the forest because they've been focused on getting the oil. But as they're trying to diversify their economy, they're going to build dams, they're expanding their palm oil, they're expanding their timber harvesting. So this is an opportunity to create a conservation blueprint going into the future. Where are the important areas to protect and where are the areas that you can develop? And the way we identify those areas is through ecosystem service modeling. Where are the benefits in terms of flood protection? Let's go to the next slide. I guess I'm in control. Here's a great picture, one of my favorite pictures in Gabon that I took. We were hiking through this forest and there was a forest elephant there in the morning taking a morning dip. You don't want to get too close to these guys, but the magnificence of nature right there, God's creations. And we ended up, after this period, developing a conservation blueprint of all the most important places to keep intact, to protect, and to manage well. These are the areas that are going to provide the Gabonese the most benefits to people in terms of flood protection, erosion control, lots and lots of benefits that they're gaining from these habitats. And we've talked a lot about coral reefs. Coral reefs are another very, very important ecosystem. Teresa's mentioned some facts about them, but there's millions that rely on food from coral reefs and protection. I was able to work in the middle of the Pacific in this beautiful oasis called the Palmyra Atoll. And this place is jointly managed by the Nature Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And what we're trying to do is restore a lot of the habitats that were destroyed during World War II when this was turned into a naval base. And the inner lagoon was totally altered. There were roads built, islands connected. And so now nature is starting to reclaim that island, and we're monitoring it, and we're using drones. So I talked a little bit about remote sensing. Drones are a great tool that we've been using for the past 10 years, where we can put a camera or a special sensor on there. We can fly at about 400 feet and we can collect systematically data over this entire area. And then we can take that data, put it into a computer, and we can analyze change and analyze the health of the system. We go out in the field, we dive, we take measurements in water. We can correlate those measurements. Everything's tied to location. There's lots of different platforms we can use. We can use satellites, we can use airplanes, we use aerial drones. We can use drones that ride on the water and have their own propulsion and collect data. But this is all part of a process to analyze information at multiple scales, and then it helps us see the big picture and make better decisions. That's what we're trying to do. Is we have limited resources to do conservation. It's strategic in knowing where is the best place to work, where is the place that we can get the most bang for our buck, and specifically look at connections to people. Here's an example of the data we collect from an airplane where we can actually visualize where live coral is. Areas in red are higher densities of live coral. And then we can use that information to go and restore coral. Here's one of our divers from TNC where we actually grow coral in nurseries and then we outplant it on the reef. Another area that I've worked in is Haiti. And Haiti is an amazing place. And it has a lot of problems with political stability, with poverty. If there's any place that I know of in terms of the people relying on nature, it's Haiti. There's fishers that go out every day and fish everything that they can. And we're working with the fishers to try to find alternative livelihoods, honey farmers, or they'll grow breadfruit and turn it into flour. We're trying to find ways to reduce pressure, but at the same time, we're trying to find where are the important places in Haiti to protect. 5 years ago, we helped Haiti establish the first marine protected area. And I had the chance of going there and exploring this area and identifying the areas where nature was thriving. And when I went there, I didn't have very high hopes, but nature, if you give it a chance, it is amazing how it can surprise you. And this is an image of the reefs in the northern part of Haiti. And I was blown away when I saw the live coral. The fishing pressure is tremendous, but we still have very healthy functioning coral in some of these areas. And we're finding areas to protect and then working with the fishing communities to understand and manage these places. Implement things like mesh size restrictions in your nets, seasonal closures, size limits, and things like that can help sustain their reefs. And over the past 5 years, we've helped to establish a network of marine protected areas across Haiti, and we're working with the locals to develop management plans and manage those so that they can have fish into the future. Another thing that we've really spent a lot of time talking about is mangroves. And mangroves, as Teresa has mentioned, is very important for, like coral reefs, absorbing flood damage. You want to have mangroves there to filter the water that goes into the ocean. It helps protect the reefs. It also provides nursery grounds for baby fish. It absorbs the storms and the flooding from the storms. And this is an area in Dominican Republic where we visualized the impacts of a flood. And then we're using this information to design how we can restore mangroves. Here's an area of mangroves in Jamaica where a road has been built and the hydrology has been cut off. And so those mangroves have died. And this is an area where we can put in culverts and we can restore that hydrology, and those mangroves will come back. So we use GIS to identify where can we bring nature back. It's called nature-based solutions that will benefit people and help reduce the damage caused by these floods. And the last thing I want to talk about is marine zoning. And just like on land, we work with governments to identify zones in the ocean. And so there's a lot of conflict that may be going on, activities that are incompatible. I remember being in St. Kitts and Nevis, and there was a ferry that was going in between the island, and the fishers kept putting their fish pots or their traps in the lane of the ferry. And as the ferry would go along, it would get caught in the motor of the boat, and that's incompatibility. So it's all about bringing sustainability to ocean space and identifying areas where you can have tourism, areas where you can have fishing, areas where you can have industrial activities, areas where you can have research, and dividing that up. And here's another example in Dominican Republic, where in the Samana Bay, where we worked with the community, the locals, to identify and bring harmony to these different activities. We mapped out the habitats, we mapped out where the reefs were, where the seagrass was, where the muddy bottoms were, the pelagic areas. And then we mapped the tourism activities, we mapped fishing, where the important fishing areas were with the fishers. And then we brought all this together and identified conflict zones. And then through a series of workshops, we made decisions. We said, well, you can't fish wherever you want. You can't, if you want to have a sustainable future, we need to divide this up and bring harmony. And we used GIS to do this. It was all about spatial data and trying to make sense of a complicated landscape and achieve efficiency and be effective in the work that we're doing. And then everyone benefits. So let's wrap this up.
Yes. So we have a lot of fun, right? But our whole goal, or like what the wish of, at least the wish of our hearts, like it sounds really cheesy, but like the reason why I do this is because I care, right? And you can do two things when you think about environmental stuff. You can pretend that they're not happening, because like so far, everybody that's here in Provo with me, we have a good life. Sometimes like it's smoky or we can't swim on the lake, but overall we have food, we have a warm or cold house, like we're fine. You can deny that. or you can get petrified and just be really scared and just go very negative. But in the scriptures says that God has not given us the spirit of fear. We can do things. And what we were trying to portray today is the idea that there's technology, there's knowledge that's out there for us to do something. And maybe you're like, I am not a mapper, I don't know any of these things. You don't have to be a mapper. Like there's a lot of things that are happening that are good, that can lead you to action, right? I think one of the biggest things that I like about thinking of location is that sense of belonging that I get when I take the time to understand my community, understand what is happening here in Provo, right? What are the issues that I have here? What are the beautiful things that are around me? And then appreciate all those creations that are here for me to thrive and to take care of. Because I understand my environment, I get a bigger vision, and then I can act, right? Or I can have conversations. I don't know, just like the way I think changes as I try to understand my world.
Yeah, I just think that, as I mentioned before, in our chief scientist, Catherine Hayhoe, has said, failure to act is failure to love our brothers and sisters. And we need to be effective in the decisions we make and be more efficient. And these tools allow us to do that. And I think that there's a lot of actions that we can do individually and collectively, like mini raindrops, we can make a flood, and a flood of impact.
Yeah. And
this is a beautiful world that we live in, and there's a lot of conflict going on, and we need to try to separate, what actions are really going to make a difference, and using technology and tools is going to guide us in that direction.
Yeah, no, and we hope you felt some sort of inspiration here. I feel inspiration. Like a lot of people here in the audience are my friends that I know how they live their lives, right? And I see a compost bin or somebody that's a good advocate for like green politics, a biker, another biker, friends that like to eat well, friends that are asking me questions about how they can do things, that are students that are working in a lot of mapping for good projects, people that initiate organizations or lead organizations to make this work, or people that are just here to get informed, like a lot of you on Zoom. People are staying awake very late to watch this Zoom little meeting, right? There's a lot of people are thinking of these things. So there's a lot of good things happening. My wish is to feel that momentum. Like, let us have that spiritual momentum, environmental momentum, go in the positive way and just act. We are part of a big thing. Whatever we do will affect the other person. Whatever happens to the environment affects us. Whatever we do to the environment will affect us. So we have a lot of power, and I just hope we can use it for good.